Havas, and I'm a professor at Trent University in Environmental and Resource Studies. And I have a letter here that's an open letter to the school board dealing with Wi-Fi. I am not going to read that letter verbatim. What I'm going to do instead is speak to some of the key issues that I raise in this document. One of the first issues is that we are performing an experiment on children that has never been done before. We are exposing children to microwave radiation for 6 hours during every school day for 1,200 hours each year. The levels of exposure are considered low according to Health Canada's guidelines, but Health Canada's guidelines are based on the heating effect of a 200-pound, 6-foot-tall male. These guidelines were established to protect military personnel against radar. They were never intended to protect children. We have had absolutely no studies looking at the long-term effects of this radiation on young people or even on adults. There are no long-term low-level exposure studies that I'm aware of. There are studies looking at rats. When you expose them to the same frequency that we use in Wi-Fi, these rats have an increased risk of developing various types of cancers. Their immune system is impaired. There's evidence of DNA breaks, and all of these are precursors for cancer. So what we are basically doing is putting our children in a carcinogenic environment, and we will get the results of this 10, 15 years down the road. I have another concern, and that is that children who are exposed to Wi-Fi currently in schools in the Collingwood area have been going home complaining of ill health to their parents. They have headaches. They have difficulty thinking in school. They claim that they're extremely weak. One young boy said he could hardly hold his pen in the classroom. I think this interferes not only with your health, but with your abilities to learn. And I think one of the most profound results that we're getting from these children is that they're complaining of heart problems. Their hearts are fluttering, they're beating very rapidly. And the reason I'm particularly concerned about this is I've done research in this area where we exposed adults to the same frequency, 2.4 gigahertz, for 3-minute periods to a level that is 0.3% of safety code 6. These are very, very low levels of exposure. And we found that 40% of the people that we tested developed heart abnormalities only when they were exposed to this radiation. So if 0.3% of the guidelines can affect adults, I can imagine that that level will affect children as well, if not lower. One of the things that we're told is that Wi-Fi in schools is perfectly safe because not only is it below Safety Code 6 guidelines, but it's well below Safety Code 6 guidelines. Recently, the schools that I referred to in the Barrie area hired a consultant to do monitoring. And they measured 2 schools, and they measured approximately 10 rooms in each school. In one of the schools, the guidelines were actually exceeded for Safety Code 6, and they were exceeded by about 30%. Now, the school board tried to deny this. They tried to downplay the information. Indeed, the press report that came out from that school was that the guidelines were not exceeded. This is simply false. And unfortunately, very few people have access to that report, and that report is actually in the copy that you have in front of you. So the guidelines were exceeded. The guidelines are totally inadequate. Levels well below the guidelines cause heart problems in people, as well as a number of other things. We've had studies recently that show that sperm is affected if you hold a laptop computer in your lap that's on Wi-Fi. And that's affected after just a few minutes of exposure. We have no idea how it's affecting the human egg cell. And if it does damage the egg cell, we're in deep trouble because it could mean the interference with reproduction for young people. When they become reproductively mature and they want to have families, they might have difficulty having them. There's also the potential for genetic damage to the sperm and the egg cell. So what we're talking about is not just the effects it has immediately on the population of children that we have in those schools, but on the long-term population for our society. Dr. Sheila Bassour, who was the Medical Officer of Health for the City of Toronto, in 1999 asked that the guidelines that we currently have in Canada be reduced to 1% of those guidelines. Now, she had an impeccable reputation as a Medical Officer of Health, not only for the City of Toronto, but for the province as well. And unfortunately, Health Canada has not responded to those recommendations. One of the other things that concerns me, and this is not from the scientific perspective, but from a person who lives in Canada and who recognizes the importance of free choice in a democratic society, is that many of the teachers who want to share this information with their colleagues are denied that right. Their jobs are at stake. They have been denied the ability to share information with others. Parents have been denied the right of allowing or not allowing their children to be exposed to this radiation. And I think that's simply unacceptable. And one of the prime reasons that I'm so opposed to this is not only because of the health effects, but because we have an alternative technology. We do not have to use wireless internet access. We have wired access. Indeed, many of the schools are ripping out the wired access and replacing it with wireless. Many of the individuals who are making decisions don't have enough technical knowledge to recognize that we're not denying them internet access. We're simply asking not to put the radiation through the air and through our bodies, but to simply run it along a wire and allow children to access it that way. Thank you very much.
My name is Malini Menon, and I'm a